Recording in progress.
The Petaluma Planning Commission to order and request a roll call vote, please, for the roll call.
Potter,
Here.
Bauer,
Here.
Hooper,
Here.
Alonso, absent, Ryder,
Here.
Wistman,
Here.
Fisher,
Here.
Okay, that concludes the roll call, and item number 3 is general public comment, and so I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Eric Roberts, to provide any speakers that are on the Zoom call joining us tonight.
Thank you, Chair Potter. I see we have a few hands raised for our attendees joining us tonight. You'll simply want to raise your hand using the button at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you'd like to participate in public comment. I see we have 2 raising hands now. Start with Veronica O, followed by Taryn Obaid. Veronica, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself, and I'll go ahead and share my timer as well.
Good evening, Commission and community. I just wanted to make an announcement on September 22nd, Wednesday at 7 p.m. The Know Before You Grow General Plan Series has architect and author Douglas Farr talking about transit-oriented development, how to create sustainable neighborhoods through car-free areas, locally owned stores, walkable neighborhoods, and accessibility. I invite you to go to the urbanchat.org website and sign up for the emails. The presentations thus far have been extremely informative, and this one will probably be no exception. So it's a great resource for all of us to learn more about how we can make a better city. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Veronica. Up next, we have Taryn Obaid. Taryn, I've allowed you to speak, and you'll need to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Good evening. I wanted to make a suggestion tonight that I think would really be a healthy and strong and first-class thing for our city, and that is to up a notch or 2 our standards for conflict of interest. And what I mean by that is, as a citizen who's immersed myself in our government and also campaign finance analysis of some of our city council members, there's a lot of alliances between developers and let's call them players. Pardon me, I mean no disrespect, but from a game theory perspective, right? Players within our city government. And I noticed that there's a lot of nepotism here. And I would really like for each of the development projects that come before our city planning as well as city council for there to be rigorous disclosure up front. Not just whether there's a conflict of interest or financial relationships under the definition of the FPPC, but also any appearance, because there's a lot of back and forth going on. I was looking at the documents for the LaFranchi Casa Grande development, and I was surprised to see that he did his own flood analysis, the runoff or storm runoff analysis he did himself, and we all know there's storm flood area up there. And so, you know, I got to thinking of, well, why did we allow that? I just think that the optics are wrong, and it doesn't have to be that way. Why not cross our T's and dot our I's? Also, you know, just an FYI along the same lines here, one of the consultants that we hired to do our general plan, to do the traffic and parking piece of it, is a developer in town who right now, I guess they yanked it, but until I called it to the city's attention, is asking for major parking and traffic concessions. And good or bad, who knows? Maybe you all have an idea about it, but I think we should get that kind of thing out in the open beforehand, not sweep it out under the rug after he's appointed and after it's called out. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you for your comments, Aaron. I don't see any more hands raised. And with that, I'll pass it back to Chair Potter.
Thank you. Thank you for that, and for members of the public. And now I'd like to close the general public comment period, and we'll move on to our committee comments. So for this part of the meeting, I'm going to ask for each of the committees chairs to provide an update, and if you could unmute yourself while you're speaking and then mute at the end, that would be great. So we'll start with our council liaison, Councilmember Fisher.
Thank you, Chair Potter. Council did meet last night, and I think the only thing relevant to this commission is that we approve the final map for the Casa Grande subdivision, speaking of which, and the inclusionary housing agreement. And then, not germane to this group, but to the entire city, we are going to go into the next tier of our water usage. So that means landscapes can only be watered on Tuesdays and Saturdays between 4 a.m. and 8 a.m. So we'll see you out there early in the morning. That's all I have.
Okay, thank you for that. And the next report is for the Pedestrian and Bike Committee, Commissioner Hooper.
Hello, I will also keep my report short. We heard a presentation from the Bay Trail and to see what updates have been happening throughout the 9 Bay Area counties. And we also had a fairly lengthy report out from Councilmember McDonald with regards to pedestrian bicycle related funding decisions. But outside of that, not too much related to this commission.
Okay, thank you. We also had a meeting of the Tree Advisory Committee, Commissioner Wisman.
Not since our last meeting. The Tree Advisory meets tomorrow is the next scheduled, so we've had a bit of a gap since our last one.
Okay, and then I had heard that the Vehicle Miles Traveled Committee has not met since I was away, but I'm wondering if staff could give an update on the status of that committee in relation to the recommendations of the council.
You bet. Thanks. So that committee is going to continue to meet to talk about citywide mitigation options, kind of in some of the short term while we're working on the general plan update, but definitely with the clock ticking with our carbon neutrality goals. So we are looking at an expanded scope of work from Fair and Peers to continue to work with the city and the VMT, Vehicle Miles Traveled Technical Advisory Committee on looking at some different options for those type of mitigation. So I believe that the committee is going to meet again on the first Tuesday in October.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that update. And if we could move on for staff comments, I see that we have an interim community development director to provide an update.
That is me. So adding on a couple things from last night's council meeting that, while maybe not specifically in the Planning Commission's purview, just I know that it's helpful to know kind of what's going on outside of what might come before you. The council did declare a shelter crisis last night and adopted an urgency ordinance that provides the city some flexibility from zoning some of the building and fire codes as well as CEQA in order to for a city-initiated shelter project on city-owned land, city-owned or leased land. And a lot of this is kind of queuing things up for a discussion that the council will have next Monday about a temporary expansion of the COTS facility at the Mary Isaac Center. So recognizing the acute need for additional shelter, the impacts that COVID has had on those experiencing homelessness in our community, the requirements for the shelter we did have to reduce beds in response to COVID. That was adopted by the council. Also related to this stage 4 drought declaration, there's 2 aspects that might be of interest to this group that come with that stage 4. One is a prohibition of filling or topping off swimming pools. So while swimming pools can still be built, there's not a prohibition of building a swimming pool. You cannot fill a new swimming pool. So if there's a building permit for, let's say, a single family home with a pool in the backyard, they do receive a disclosure that under our current regulations, they will not be able to actually fill the pool with water once finished. Another thing that is a requirement now under the stage 4 is that no landscaping can be planted that requires water. So no trees, no shrubs, no ground cover, live ground cover. So you will be seeing, and I think even in our first item on the agenda, you will be seeing a new condition added to entitlements that that mentions that and indicates that should it come to the final inspection and or certificate of occupancy, and we are still under drought conditions that prohibit new landscaping, that we will allow them to final that out with a deposit, so that after we're out of the drought condition, they would be able to then install their landscaping. And we will also be adding that condition on all building permits, regardless of whether there was a discretionary entitlement approved, as well as reaching out to projects that are actually under construction now to let them know that as they get close to finishing, if we are still under our stage 4 or a more advanced stage of drought, that we will not be allowing any planting of landscaping that requires water. So something to note. Also, many of you may have noticed that the Polyclass Center is under quite a bit of renovation across from City Hall. That project was reviewed by the Historic and Cultural Preservation Committee and has run into a little bit more of damage to some of the exterior materials than they had thought, but are working diligently to evaluate and replace in kind as they do that renovation. So we're very excited for the end result of that. I also wanted to mention some of the general plan update activities that have been happening. We had a series of quadrant meetings where people join to talk about whether was assets or challenges or things they'd like to see or things that they would like to stay exactly the same in the different quadrants of the city to gain some of that information. We have also done, so far, I believe it's 4 pop-ups where we pop up at a farmer's market or an evening market or another place where we are coming to people instead of people having to come to us to provide comment. So we have had those. We've had booths at the Eastside Farmers Market and at the Walnut Park Farmers Market, and we are scheduling one in front of Lola's Market to try to continue to gain input and kind of reach people that maybe otherwise wouldn't be attending an evening meeting. We are also working towards a community visioning workshop on the 29th of September. which will be the topic of the General Plan Advisory Committee's meeting on Thursday. I think that is it. I guess I would mention one other thing. We did recently bring a historic preservation specialist onto our planning team. So we're excited to invite Isabel onto our team. She just met the Historic and Cultural Preservation Committee at their meeting at 4 today, and will be coming up to speed on all things preservation in Petaluma. And I believe that's all I have for this evening.
Well, thank you so much for that report. And this is the time now, if there are any other reports from any of the commissioners. Councilman Fisher?
Can I ask a quick question of the planning community development director interim? I was looking today for the recordings of those quadrant meetings and didn't see them on the city's website, the Plan Petaluma
They're
website.
not on planpetaluma.org yet.
Okay, but they're going to be coming up.
I think they should be. I will check into that.
Okay.
They were recorded.
Yeah.
And I wanted to acknowledge our planning commissioner Alonso for working the polls tonight for the election and doing a civic duty, and we really appreciate that. We miss him, but we will continue to be taking care of business. And just in response to some of the public comment, I wanted to make sure that, as a reminder, that at each of the agenda items, we ask for a disclosure of any conflict of interest with individual commissioners, any ex parte communications as well, to make sure that we're all on the same page about those issues. Each of the commissioner annually fills out the 700 form, which is a statement of economic interests. And we also undergo ethics training as required by law. So not everyone might be aware of those steps that the commission takes in an effort to have full disclosure and transparency. We appreciate the comments and suggestion as we move forward, and we're always looking for objectivity in our environmental analysis and the review of the application. So interim Community Development Director Hines, I don't know if you have anything to add to that, because I always feel like it's a commission working together with staff, the community, and the applicants to review these applications.
Yeah, I would agree everything that's said. One of the things that came to mind when Ms. Obaid was making her comment is I recall that City of Santa Rosa, I believe, has a disclosure form that they have their applicants fill out. And that was something that we could look into as you know, another layer to identify potential conflicts or appearances of conflicts from the applicant side of things too. I'll look into that. It's been a while since I saw that form, but I have that recollection of something that they did in one of our neighboring jurisdictions.
Well, I can't speak for everyone, but I think the commission would be interested in general in seeing that form. So if in the future it could be provided, that'd be appreciated. Okay, are there any other comments or reports from the commissioners tonight? I'm not seeing any hands, so we'll move on to item 6, which is approval of our minutes. They're the minutes from the Tuesday, August 24th, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. I didn't attend the meeting. I'm wondering if there's anyone who wants to make a motion, or just by a nod of heads that those minutes are approved. All good? Okay, the minutes of the August 24th, 2021 meeting are approved. And this is the time in this meeting that we'll move on to new business. And so the first item is the Protiva residence and architectural review and site plan. And I want to ask at this time if any of the commissioners have any ex parte communications to report. Okay, I'm not seeing any. I'll ask then for the staff to give a presentation. We'll try to limit it to 10 to 15 minutes. And I see it's up here on the Zoom, and an excellent rendering of the proposed residence. So we're ready for the staff report.
Great, thank you. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Crystal, and I'm going to be providing an overview of the project before you this evening. So first, for the benefit of both the commission as well as the public, I'm going to begin by providing an overview of the Planning Commission's role at tonight's hearing. And then I'll follow that with a background of the project site, description of the proposed project, staff's analysis with regard to the applicable guidelines and regulations, an overview of public comments received on the project, and I'll conclude with a recommendation. So the project is before the Planning Commission tonight as it proposes construction of a new residence in the West Hills sub-area of the general plan. And it's also within the Suncrest Estates PUD, which specifies that new construction in this zoning district requires review by the Planning Commission. So the role of the Planning Commission at this hearing is to consider whether the project is consistent with and meets the applicable findings. And in determining whether the project meets the applicable findings, the Planning Commission should consider the analysis contained in the staff report, as well as staff and applicant presentations and public comments received prior to and at this hearing. If the Planning Commission finds that the project is consistent with the applicable findings and chooses to approve the project, conditions of approval should be discussed to determine whether they are adequate. The project site is located on a vacant lot. It's approximately 1 acre and has steeply sloping with slopes ranging from 28 to 40%. As I mentioned, the lot was originally established as part of the Suncrest Estates subdivision, which was approved by the City Council in 1997. And then the lot was further subdivided in 2012. I would also like to note that the site is located within the city's wildland urban interface. So a little bit more context here. The site is within, like I said, is within the West Hills sub area of the general plan, and it has a general plan designation of very low density residential, which is intended primarily for single family development. And the site is also within the Suncrest Estates PUD. And this map here, I realize the legend may not be the easiest thing to see, so I do apologize for that. But essentially just trying to show that it's adjacent zoning districts are other planned unit developments in the area. So the project is proposing to construct a new single family residence with an approximately 47-foot front setback, 21-foot east side setback, 55-foot west side setback, and it's going to be located greater than 90 feet from the rear property line. Landscaping is proposed along the front portion of the lot, whereas the rear portion will remain as it is. And in addition, the project proposes retaining walls throughout the site, given the steep slope. So that includes 2 terraced retaining walls along the driveway, a tapered retaining wall at the rear of the residence, and landscape retaining walls along the main and lower level walkways. And the arrows and text on this slide is indicating the locations of those retaining walls. The lower level of the residence contains a bathroom, bedroom, living area, laundry area, and wet bar. And it has 2 entry points, including 1 exterior and 1 interior, both indicated on this slide here. The main level is the largest of the 3 levels and contains the attached 2-car garage, an entry foyer, storage and laundry areas, office, kitchen, living and dining rooms, and a primary bedroom and bathroom. The entry into the main level includes an 87 square foot covered porch, and the rear of the residence contains an approximately 120 square foot covered porch. And lastly, the upper level, the smallest of the 3 levels, and it's comprised of 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom. So as shown here, the front elevation features shed roof form situated over the main entrance, garage, and living room. In addition, the garage and living room portions of the front elevation are situated in an oblique orientation to the street frontage, which helps to better break up the overall massing of the building. So as you'll notice, the top image is the full front elevation, whereas the bottom 2 images are showing a head-on view of those oblique orientations. So other architectural features that are visible from this elevation include a covered front porch with wood look siding. There's a projecting feature with wood look siding, which is situated to the left of the main entry. There's also windows of various sizes and orientations. And then also a detached refuse enclosure with shed roof and wood look siding to match the residence. This slide is showing the rear elevations, and as you can see here, it's divided into an upper and lower portion, and that's intended to step with the hillside. So the upper portion, which is shown in the top left of the screen, features a shed roof form and 3 vertically oriented windows. Staff would like to note that this portion of the residence will retain the initial 10 feet of the hillside, and then it also includes a tapered retaining wall that steps down with the lot. The lower portion of the residence includes a hip roof form, small shed roof over the covered rear porch, and porch columns also with wood look siding. The east elevation includes the lower level of the residence, as shown outlined in red here. So that's including the covered exterior entrance. Architectural features along this elevation include 3 vertically oriented windows on the main level, a covered entry with wood look siding and wall sconces. And given the orientation of the residence not being exactly parallel to the street, you can see much of the front elevation here. The west side elevation includes views of the attached 2-car garage and detached refuse enclosure. And the garage roof form, as you can see, is oriented to conform to the natural topography of the lot, whereas the main portion of the residence beyond features an opposing shed roof orientation. And the garage facade also features a panel door with wood look siding and wall sconces on either side. This is just a kind of brief view of the project renderings, which I think provide additional kind of context of the hillside and how the lot steps with the hillside. So here you can see the site circulation features, such as the stairs. You can see the use of the wood look siding kind of throughout the project. And again, a couple other orientations here. So this is views of the residence, and you can see the steeply sloping lot kind of going up behind the residence. The project proposes asphalt composition shingle and standing seam metal roofs in dark brown, smooth finish cement plaster in white. As I've mentioned a couple of times, the natural wood look fiber cement siding, dark brown clad wood windows, and a variety of wall sconces and pathway lights that comply with the city's requirements to be down hooded to avoid light and glare. As I previously mentioned, the landscaping is going to be located along the front portion of the lot between Wallenberg Way and the new residence. The plan includes mostly low-growing plants and evergreen trees, which are intended to partially screen the residents from the public right-of-way. Landscaping is also proposed along the front and east side elevations of the residence and include a mixture of trees, shrubs, perennials, grasses, ground covers. And the proposed landscape palette includes low to moderate water users that are drought and fire resistant. And the project will install a low drip irrigation system as part of the proposed landscaping. This is a list of a couple of the standards of review that the project is subject to. I'm not going to go into these in detail because they are detailed in your staff report, but in general, the project is consistent with the general plan, including the policies listed here, which promote infill development, seek to preserve the overall scale and character of the neighborhood, and allow for development in the hillside that are site sensitive. Project is also subject to the regulations contained in the Suncrest Estates PUD guidelines. As shown here, the project is consistent with the established building envelope, which is shown on the parcel map included as an attachment to your staff report. And it's also consistent with the architectural design, grading, and landscaping requirements set forth in the PUD. The project is also subject to the single lot development hillside standards in Chapter 16, as well as the SPAR findings. And again, detailed findings are provided in the staff report and draft resolution. But again, in general, staff concluded that the project meets all applicable findings. The residence is designed to conform with the natural slope of the lot and proposes a contemporary design that features various roof forms, orientations, and setbacks, which help to break up the massing of the building. In addition, the project is conditioned to require incorporation of tree protection measures within the drip line of trees on the adjacent property, as those are protected trees under the city's ordinance. And with regards to CEQA, the project is categorically exempt under Section 15303, which allows for construction of one single family dwelling on a residentially zoned site. And also would like to note that the project is not subject to any of the exceptions to the use of a categorical exemption. In addition, I would also like to note that an MND a mitigated negative declaration with mitigation measures was prepared as part of the original subdivision, and applicable mitigations have been incorporated as conditions of approval in the draft resolution. Consistent with applicable requirements, the applicants held a neighborhood meeting for the project. There weren't a ton of public comments received. Mostly people were seeking additional information on the status of the project, how long construction was going to occur, and those sorts of things. But other than that, no formal written public comments have been provided on the project. And to conclude, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution approving site plan and architectural review for construction of the single-family dwelling. And I'd also like to just point out a couple of notable conditions. As Councilmember Fisher pointed out, the city did implement the stage 4 of the city's water shortage contingency plan. And one of those things that needs to be required with is that there's a moratorium on the installation of new landscaping. Since we didn't have that language prepared until earlier this afternoon, I am going to read that into the record on the next slide. And I will just kind of caveat that with it's a lot. And I do apologize for the long-windedness of it, but do want to just get that read into the record. And then just want to point out a couple other conditions that we've imposed, one of which is requiring revisions to demonstrate that the project will comply with the all-electric ordinance that was recently adopted by City Council. And then also, again, going back to that tree protection measure. So there were, as you probably saw in the tree protection plan submitted for the project, there were several recommendations from the project arborist. And so we are requiring that the applicant demonstrate compliance with those during construction. Okay, so here we go on this condition. Again, I'm sorry for how long-winded it is, and I'm happy to pull the slide back up later if anybody wants to take a second look at it. So in accordance with resolution number blank adopted September 13th, 2021, which authorized the Petaluma City Manager to implement stage 4 of the city's water shortage contingency plan and to implement stages 5 through 6 as warranted by future water shortage levels, a moratorium on installation of new landscapes or replanting of existing landscapes that require water is now in effect. So long as a moratorium on new and replanted landscapes that require water remains in effect, the applicant is prohibited from installing new landscapes or replanting existing landscapes that require water, notwithstanding any contrary conditions in this resolution approving site plan and architectural review. This condition only applies to installing and replacing plants, trees, and other landscaping features requiring water. Any conditions in this resolution approving site plan and architectural review concerning grading, installation of irrigation improvements, drainage features, lighting, and other improvements related to landscapes, other than the installation or replacement of plants, trees, or other landscape features requiring water, remain in effect. If the project that is subject to the site plan and architectural review is complete except for installation of required landscape that requires water, the applicant may apply to the planning manager for a final inspection or certificate of occupancy, notwithstanding that required landscape that requires water is incomplete upon deposit with the planning manager of security satisfactory to the planning manager equal to the cost of the incomplete landscape. Without further action by the blank, and I do apologize because I don't actually know what the intent of this portion of the sentence is, so maybe we can get some clarification there. This condition shall expire and cease to be of any effect, and any requirements in this resolution approving site plan and architectural review to install landscape that requires water shall become effective upon the expiration of the moratorium on installation of new landscapes or replanting of existing landscapes that require water in the city's water shortage contingency plan. And with that, I will conclude my presentation.
And Crystal, I think that that last section is meant to say that the condition will cease to exist and doesn't have to come back to the Planning Commission for subsequent action. It will track with the drought requirements of the city.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah, I just wasn't super clear on that. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to the applicant team, and they've been informed of the time limits. So I'll go then.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. It was comprehensive, and we're looking forward to hearing from the applicant.
Yeah, hi, I'm the applicant, Mark Pertiva, here with my wife, Maureen. We both like to say a few words. Can you hear us there?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you, Crystal, for that great report.
Yes, thank you. First off, we're looking forward to settling in Petaluma. Although Mark and I have Bay Area roots, we've spent the last 17 years in the Sierra Nevada foothills. We wanted to get back to the Bay Area for our retirement years and decided that Petaluma is the perfect place for us. We started looking for existing homes as well as lots that were close to town. We wanted predominantly single-story living for aging in place. We wanted connected but private rooms for our adult children to stay when they're visiting, or in case they boomerang. I don't know, they're 20, so we'll see. The rooms could also be used later if we needed live-in assistance at some point. With our specific list of functional needs, it was hard to find an existing home, especially one that had a primary bedroom and garage on the main floor. So we felt really lucky when we acquired 23 Wallenberg and could design a home that would fit our needs. So it's a challenging lot due to the steep hill, and Mark will talk about how the design team worked with that challenge and came up with our current plan.
Yeah, the universal steepness of the site, combined with Petaluma's grade limit for driveways, dictated the general location of our driveway. With that starting point predetermined for us, we had the choice between stepping the house down the hill from the garage pad or stepping up the hill. We chose to step downhill for two reasons. Firstly, because it was the only way to accomplish predominantly single-story living. And secondly, because it kept the driveway to the side of the house and the front yard. With the driveway off to the side, we can more easily create a visual buffer between the house and the neighborhood with a few trees, hopefully if the drought ends. As they grow, we will get some privacy and our neighbors will not have to look at a full frontal view of our house. The architectural style, which has been referred to as contemporary minimalist, was largely determined by the roof. Our combination of shed and hip roofs accomplishes three objectives of the Hillside Protection Ordinance by minimizing the height of the structure, by breaking the roof into smaller components, and by aligning the roof pitch with the natural contours of the hillside. The roof design also provides a back of the house platform for a solar array that will have southern exposure. Meanwhile, combination of white stucco and brown wood siding is not only trending in contemporary architecture, but has also been popular for many centuries all around the world. And lastly, the design guidelines for the Wallenberg neighborhood calls for contrasting architectural designs and variety obtained by use of form, color, texture, and material. In keeping with that objective, our design will add a contemporary aspect to the street. All in all, our design is a good solution for a challenging build site. Thanks for listening.
Excellent. Thank you, Mark. I just wanted to also introduce myself. I'm Nathan Fishman with LaFranchi & Associates, and Greg Jones, architect, and Andrew Chapman, landscape architect, are here to answer some questions if you guys have anything in particular. But as Mark and the rest of the team overviewed, really building into the hillside and accounting for the steepness of the slope was the predominant challenge for the site, and that's how we came to the site we've proposed for you guys this evening. So we'll be available as needed.
So at this time, I'd like to open the public comment to hear comments from the public. I do believe that commissioners will have some questions for the applicant team. So our moderator, Robert, is there any, are there any public comments tonight on this item?
I apologize. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. There are no hands raised at this time, so I don't believe that there's any public comment for this item.
Okay. Seeing that there are no hands raised or anyone waiting in the waiting room for Zoom, I'm going to close the public comment period and bring it back to the commissioners for any questions from staff or the applicant. But I did want to...
Chair Potter, there is one hand raised in the attendees.
Oh,
So
okay.
we might just want to pause and welcome that comment that just came up as we were closing it.
Okay, well then let's reopen the comment period so we can hear from that individual.
Thanks for your patience, everyone. My Zoom is giving me some glitches. Okay, I've just pulled up the participants window. I do see one public comment from Taryn. I'll go ahead and share my timer. Okay, Taryn, I've allowed you to speak.
Hi, thank you. Thank you, Heather, for noticing me. And I'm sorry, Chair Potter. I'm having trouble with my device here, and sorry for the delay. This home looks like a very nice home, but I was not able to open up the tree protections. And for some reason, I think my device is giving out on me, and I apologize for that. But I, for what it's worth, I would like to encourage that we are able to be certain that heritage trees or any mature trees on the lot, as many as possible, are protected, because cutting down one mature tree means that we'll need to plant 30 new ones to replace it. And again, I don't know what's going on with this lot. It does look lovely. Congratulations. But I know that there have been other recent projects as recent as this past year that have moved forward with slaughtering every single tree on the lot. And I just really don't expect that's the case with this one, but I want to make sure that it's not. So that's my comment. Thank you very much. And again, my apologies for the delay.
Thank you. No worries. We're all being challenged by this new way of having a public meeting. So we appreciate the comments. And with that, I will close the public comment period, and we will have questions from the commissioners. But before we get started, because the new stage 4 drought requirements are new, and we heard read into the record a lengthy condition on this project, which I appreciate, I did want to ask a question and see if others might be interested in hearing a little bit more, because the lot is so steep and there's massive grading. What kind of measures for erosion control will be allowed, notwithstanding the drought, to ensure that the site is stable? So that's just a question we can get to, but I don't know if others here also would like to ask any questions of staff or the applicant. Councilmember Fisher?
I had a quick question about this. The applicant, you mentioned the solar array that's on one section of the roof. Did I understand that correctly? And if so, is that going to provide you all the electricity that you need for your use?
Well, it's on the, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. It's on the back side of the house. It'll probably be a 10 kilowatt south and southwest facing two different panels, two different arrays. And I envision having two different electrical panels in the house. One of them that's backed up by those two arrays. The other will be the non-backed up circuits in the house. So I kind of envision being able to run half the house on that, and then selecting which are the most important things that one would need in a power outage. But I don't think the entire house can run 24 hours on what we're going to be able to likely generate off those arrays. No. Maybe half.
And just a follow-up question, we talk about how we situate houses on a site so that you get passive heating and cooling. And was that considered at all? I guess that's more a question for Mr. Fishman.
It certainly was. It was a big goal of Mark's as well, to try to maximize his solar exposure and his passive kind of heat gain here. So yeah, to the extent we were able to, we made a predominant effort to try to retain a north-south orientation with these large bank of windows on the elevations here to capture some heat when feasible, but to the extent we could. But really the grading was what took first and foremost precedent. We're trying to be as efficient as we can with this challenging site, but certainly it was a consideration.
Okay, great. And then just one last comment for staff. Condition number 20. I think there's a typo in there. You say being building as opposed to being built, I think is what you intended to write. That's all I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Hooper?
Thank you. This question is for the project applicants and the architect. Given its proximity to the wild urban interface, I very much appreciate the roof design, especially from a wildfire perspective. Just thinking in terms of potential ember spread, are there any rear-facing gratings or any rear-facing vents? And if so, what kind of coverings are you using?
Events, the crawl space that I'll have in here is going to be unconditioned, is going to be unvented conditioned space. Actually going to insulate the walls and condition the air in there so that I don't have to vent it. I don't envision any vents other than some soffit vents so that we get proper airflow up in the attic. And those will be very small holes that not only and they'll be metal, not only to keep out embers, but to keep out bees and other insects that might want to head up in there. And I've had success with those in the past in urban areas. And so I'm going to absolutely minimize vents for sure.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sure.
Commissioner Weissman?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to applaud the design, specifically consideration of the setbacks, landscaping, notwithstanding our drought conditions, and the conformance to the hillside, and also the applicant's comments, the inclusion of solar, which I hadn't seen previously. The only question I had was, given the slope and the considerations of runoff, has there been any consideration for more permeable surface for the driveway, considering that takes up considerable amount of the finished space, and again, there's quite a bit of potential for runoff.
Right. Yeah, it is certainly a challenge for the site. Generally, the scheme for the storm drain is to utilize. There's some apologies. Let me share my screen here, folks. Are you guys able to see this overall site plan?
Yep, I can see it.
Right. So generally, our intent is to utilize there's an existing storm drain stub into the hillside on the easterly extent. But for the driveways, we'll be trying to capture the sheet flow before it returns to the right of way. And we'll be routing it across the frontage of the site, either via a pipe or like a bioswale, and ultimately returning it to one of the structures that's down on Wallenberg Way, or there is an existing field inlet on site. There's a concrete swale that's on the slope, that a portion of which will remain. So whether the driveway itself is fully permeable, or whether we intercept the water at the perimeter of the driver at an opportunity further down the slope, that is our intent. We'll be capturing it, treating everything on site, of course, per city standards, and then ultimately conveying it easterly to the existing city system here. There's also some opportunities for some of the planters and some of these retaining features to have act as bioretention planters and have filter media, and then prior to discharging, have additional spaces and landscape areas to provide some on-site treatment.
Okay, thank you.
Is anyone aware of the permeable surfaces for driveways that Petaluma welcomes? Is there a preferred surfacing? When we talk about permeable, is that perhaps concrete that's not solid? It's kind of in checkerboard where you've got soil in between the cross-hatched concrete. Is that what you're referring to? Or is there some preferred a material that's these days used on driveways that's permeable? I'm just asking for my own education here.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone know?
I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I wasn't referring to any specific technique or material, just the concept of it. So I defer to either staff or the design experts for any other recommendations.
I would encourage, I see that Gina's with us. She might have some good response to that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Certainly, city would very much embrace the use of permeable material for the driveway. Permeable pavement, which is a asphaltic product that is permeable, I think given the slopes I see there and the configuration might be the best solution. I see Nathan nodding. But there are a plethora of products out there now that are permeable that might work. And I don't pretend to be up on all of them, but if a permeable product were found, it would certainly be preferred. But it really, I want to emphasize, it's an engineered solution, and it's something that your civil engineer needs to look at, and they need to take into account the subbase, which would be different, no doubt, from what you would use under a traditional paving product, an AC or an asphalt product, and it can be more costly, generally is. So something you want to look at. And then slope stability. I don't, Nathan, what were those slopes? I didn't see how steep that was.
Oh, the driveway is running at 18%, and it, the rest of the drive varies, maybe down as flat as 5% up at the pad level. The slopes themselves are around 30 or 40% existing. So it's a very steep site, and I agree that there's certainly some opportunities for using some permeable pavements in areas. We are likely going to be down to bedrock given the site, the cut to establish the pad elevations. So, we may not necessarily have great percolation, but at a minimum, it'll help collect the flows. And ultimately, we do need to route everything to the east to the existing storm drains this way. But I think there are some opportunities pending the selection of a final product. We would, of course, try to comply as best we can with, the city's goals to encourage the fewer permeable pavements and such. Fewer impervious areas.
Thanks.
Aside from there's also permeable paver systems. Perhaps proportions of it could be utilized in that as opposed to the asphaltic systems throughout. But there are opportunities, I guess, to summarize. I think it is certainly feasible to implement some of these products.
Okay, the next speaker is Commissioner Ryder.
Thank you, Chair Potter. The only question that I had that hasn't been asked by a fellow commissioner relates to the color of the roofing materials. I have yet to find a product, and maybe this has been updated, that's this dark in color that still complies with the Cal Green solar reflectance requirements. So I didn't know if you could just speak to whether or not reflectivity was at all considered for just keeping the site cool per the building requirements.
Did take a look at reflective options in kind of medium browns and found a couple out there. But as you say, we may be depicting it at a darker brown than such features are available in. That may very well be. I'm only just now starting Title 24 and Cal Green review of the project, so I haven't had a chance to tap into any ideas from my contractor there. But it needs to be resolved. I understand.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
Fair. So that you're aiming for this color, but it may vary. So I just wanted to point that out. Great, thank you.
Councilmember Fisher.
Oops. I just want to follow up on the last answer in terms of the swales and keeping the water on the site. I just wanted to express my preference for having swales instead of concrete so that you are able to have that water actually infiltrate on site as opposed to having it run off, particularly given our current crises and our inability to keep water in the ground.
Thank you.
Yeah, very good.
And Commissioner Bauer.
Hello. Yes, thanks, Chair Potter. My only question is the same thing. I want to make sure, Chair Potter, that your question is answered. And I think we're meaning the same thing. I'm curious as to the vegetation that is going to be planted for erosion control, if that would be included in the plants that cannot be watered because of the drought condition. And I think that's a question for staff.
So I can start this out a little bit, and I think Gina, I might need your help on some, and also please recognize that literally this was passed last night. So we are trying to be as responsive as we can. So my understanding in stage 4, no landscaping that requires water can be planted under the stage 4. So we would need additional stormwater swales or, protection for erosion and runoff, particularly if we are in a prolonged drought situation where come, November, we're not seeing a lot of rain and we're not reducing our impacts. So Gina, I do not know if your team has been talking about specific requirements yet, how we will require that and to ensure that we are meeting all requirements, even if landscaping doesn't go in, or if that will be something we will be evolving as we respond.
So I apologize, but I think I missed the crux of the initial question in all that. And that was Council Member Fisher's question. Could you please repeat it?
No, it was mine.
Chair Potter.
Chair Potter, excuse me.
Potter's, yeah.
So my question is, if there is truly a moratorium on landscape plants, is that going to apply to any cover or plants that are planted for erosion control purposes on the steep slopes after the grading? And I also am concerned because I understand that the Regional Water Quality Control Board is still requiring the watering of stormwater features such as swales. So maybe this is partly a question for Mr. Brady about how we can craft these conditions so that we can honor the water shortage contingency plan stage 4 and still allow for the required water that's needed on the erosion control and the storm drain features. That's kind of the crux of the question. I don't know if that was clear.
Okay, I'm sorry. So what I will say is that truly the moratorium is on any new landscaping or remodeled landscaping that requires water, period. And that includes erosion control. So no, that can't go in yet. However, there's other ways to do erosion control besides putting plants in the ground. And I think Andrea Chapman is with us and might be able to speak to some alternatives there that would be worthy of consideration. That's about as far as we've thought this through. It is new. We're working on all of the unintended consequences. Of course, the intended consequences of these actions are to conserve water and to maintain what groundwater levels we have as best we can, and to manage our allocations of imported water as best we can. And sometimes when we do these things, there are consequences that we don't always anticipate out to the fifth chess play. So this is one that, unfortunately, I can't imagine that there would be any exception to that moratorium on the watering. It is sort of the centerpiece of the irrigation and landscaping is the centerpiece of the stage 4 actions. And I think we'll be fairly strict about observing that and having to help applicants find ways to work with that.
Could I just say that that hillside right now has excellent erosion control provided by native grasses, right? It's old cattle land. And to replace that after grading would require, if it's seeded in the fall, late fall, early winter, isn't going to require much water to get it established. And that's probably the best bet. Looking at a bunch of jute netting or whatever, it's not going to make anybody happy. And a little bit of starter water, the right season, would reseed that hill and do the job very easily.
Yeah, I think that's the issue that we're discussing is that starter water, but maybe Ms. Chapman, do you have something to add about the most, what some of the alternatives might be?
Yeah, so they do have things out there such as erosion control blankets that are seeded. And I think something that at least has some seed to it. So if there was, say, you know, even though we might still be in a drought, if we happen to get any kind of moisture, rain, it wouldn't take a whole lot to get the seed started and going. If there happens to be any rain, but I think if anything, providing some type of jute netting and because you need something to cover the ground. This year, I noticed a lot of the grasslands have actually kind of become more barren than I've ever seen before. It's like exposed to dirt, to soil. So, and I imagine that could happen, you know, depending on when construction starts and that sort of thing. It might be that situation, but I would recommend some sort of jute netting or erosion control blanket that is seeded. That would potentially, you know, start seed if there's any moisture. But straw wattles to kind of slow down any kind of erosion. You can use straw to kind of keep that straw, or you can use the straw wattles to keep the straw in place along the hillside as well. So there's just a lot of different things like that, but most of it does require water. So it's just, this is all kind of new for a lot of us. Never been in a drought quite like this before. I mean, usually we can always hydro seed, but that also requires water. So I don't know where this ordinance is going to go when it comes to the limits of what kind of water you can use. I know there's other jurisdictions that use non-potable water. So maybe there's going to be, I mean, maybe there could be an instance where, you know, in certain situations with construction sites, that maybe there could be some sort of non-potable water that could be sprayed on erosion control blankets that are seeded, or if we could use non-potable water for hydro seeding. So those are just some thoughts running through my head, but I'm still trying to grasp what to do in these situations as well.
And I guess perhaps this one final comment would be that we don't have a lot of fill slopes on the site. The site is predominantly cut into the hillside, and that's really been our goal. The portions that are filled will be at a 2-to-1 slope. So regardless of whether we do get the weather to go our way, we will be doing erosion control on those just by virtue of the necessity to construct them and retain them, you know, in the immediacy of the construction. Will have to be either geotextile or core mats, wattles throughout. You know, it'll be very standard geotechnical practices, less the planting if it'll occur. Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I think that some kind of recycled water or non-potable water might be a nice solution to get something established, but it would be helpful maybe for the city to consider the distinction between landscape versus hydro seed, because they're really two different things requiring a different amount of water and a different level of maintenance. So just going forward, the alternative to some kind of effective erosion control is never good. So with that, I don't know if there's any other comments from the commissioners or questions. We've heard from the public and not seen any. Commissioner Wishman?
Yeah, Chair Potter, thank you. Just one last comment with regards to the drought ordinance. Someone mentioned the prospect of non-potable water or something trucked in. Also would wonder whether those restrictions would be inclusive of any on-site gray water capture, which the applicant might want to consider, especially at this stage, whether if they did capture their own gray water, whether that would be usable on site, or whether that would be also included under the drought restrictions. So just raising the issue. I know as others,
great idea.
It's very new and it needs to be flushed out. So
great idea. Yeah.
Okay, are there any other comments or questions before we hear a motion or any discussion of the proposed architectural plans and site review approval? What we have before us today is a request for approval of a resolution for a site plan and architectural review for construction of a new two-story single-family home as part of the West Hills sub-area. Is there a motion from any of the commissioners? Commissioner Brower?
Sure. I'll make a motion to approve the SPAR for the house at 23 Wallenberg Way with the conditions noted.
And as read into the record. Is there a second?
I'll second.
So it's been moved and seconded. Can we have a roll call vote then?
Potter,
Aye.
Bauer,
Aye.
Hooper,
Aye.
Alonso. Oh, absent. Ryder,
Aye.
Wissman,
Aye.
Fisher,
Yes.
6 ayes.
Well, thank you and welcome to Petaluma and good luck with all the construction and hopefully we'll get some rain soon.
Yep, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time, everybody.
Okay, well, that concluded the first item under new items, and we have the second new business item today is our floodplain rezoning. And I wanted to ask first if we have any reports of ex parte communications from any of the commissioners on this item. Commissioner Bauer.
Yes, I spoke with David Keller yesterday about this.
Okay, thank you for that. And anyone else have any communications to report? Okay, then this is the time for the staff report on this item.
Thank you, Chair Potter. My name is Emmanuel Urson. I'm the project planner on this item. Share my screen here. If you can all see that. So the item before you this evening is a zoning map amendment. The zoning map is being modified to be consistent with the general plan. Under state law, zoning is required to be consistent with the general plan. Also, the general plan was modified back in 2019 to be consistent with FEMA's flood insurance rate maps that were last updated in 2016. So the general plan has a floodway designation, and this item would make the zoning map designation or areas designated or zoned floodway consistent with the areas designated floodway in the general plan. And this is the general plan's description of the floodway. It pertains to the channel of the Petaluma River and other watercourses and areas necessary to discharge the base flood level. The boundaries are determined by the flood insurance rate maps as amended and updated by FEMA. This is an overview of the general plan land use map. The floodway is indicated in this darker blue color. in essence, goes from the northernmost portion of the Petaluma River in Petaluma to the southernmost portion. And then there's a small segment of Lynch Creek that is also in the floodway district, floodway designation in the general plan. The zoning code, the implementing zoning code in Chapter 6 lays out the provisions for both the floodway district and the floodplain combining district, which acts as a overlay zone. So the floodway district is a zoning district, and in Chapter 6, the allowed uses are set forth for the floodway district, very limited in what can be done by right, basically open space ag type uses such as grazing, crops, orchards, that sort of thing. There are some conditionally permitted uses as well in the floodway district. In contrast, the floodplain combining district it's an overlay zone, and it applies to areas that are subject to flooding that are outside the floodway zone. There are underlying districts, either residential districts, commercial districts, industrial districts, that establish their own permitted land uses, and the provisions of Chapter 6 require certain types of improvements before they can be made to meet certain requirements that will protect the improvements from flooding. For instance, they need to be elevated above the floodplain level, and there are other design criteria that apply. We're not talking about any changes to the floodplain overlay. This item solely addresses the floodway district. There are attached to the staff report 5 panels that indicate the existing and proposed location of the floodway zone. This is the segment that includes Lynch Creek. There are changes there. The second panel starts up at the kind of the northwesterly end of town, the upper reaches of the Petaluma River, and goes down south or downstream through Petaluma. The red line indicates the existing zoning, which is based on the prior flood insurance rate map. And then the blue line represents the updated flood insurance rate map. So, and the blue line is what is currently shown in the general plan. So that first exhibit I showed you represents what this blue line is, follows the general plan. This is the area through the downtown. There's a few areas where and this is the area where most of the contraction occurred. These areas are still, many of these areas are still in the floodplain overlay. While they're no longer in the floodway district, they still are in the floodplain overlay. Some of these parcels, there's about, I think there's 7 of them. They're all city-owned parcels. They are no longer entirely in the floodway. However, the portions remaining outside of the floodway are really too small to be developed. So we did not recommend removing the floodway zoning from those 7 city-owned parcels. And then this is the last panel. It's down at where the river goes underneath Highway 101. And again, most of the changes are relatively modest changes to the outline of the district, of the floodway district. So there's attached to the staff report a table that lists all 221 parcels that are affected by this change. 15 are parcels that currently have no floodway zoning on them that would be added, that would have floodway zoning added to them. 86 parcels are removed entirely from the flood zone. Some of these only had a small portion of them in the flood zone, others larger portions in the flood zone. And then the remaining 120 parcels are either currently partially or entirely within the flood zone and will either have no change or have a slight decrease or a increase in the area within the flood zone. And this is the table that is attached. So it has the assessor parcel number with the site address, the existing zoning, the new zoning. As you'll see, where there's no, and then, well, let me finish. The existing parcel area, the total parcel size, the existing area of the parcels that are in the floodway zone, the areas that would be in the floodway zone after the change, and then what the decrease is in the parcel area that's in the floodway zone. The existing zoning and the new zoning does not show any parcels that are within the overlay zone. So the overlay zones remains unchanged. We did not reflect that in this table. So just, you know, want to make sure that that's very clear. And again, there's 221 parcels that are affected, and then the 7 that I mentioned that are city-owned that remain in the flood zone, or the floodway zone. Zoning amendments need to be consistent with the general plan, and this change would do that. The general plan states that the floodway is determined by the flood insurance rate maps. That's contained on page 1-8 of the general plan. The general plan, as I mentioned, was updated in 2018. Actually, I wrote 2018 here. I think that was 2019 to be consistent with the 2016 FEMA firm maps. And these changes would make it clear as to which general plan policies apply to parcels in the floodway zone. This project is consistent with the environmental review that was prepared for the general plan, the original general plan, and the amendments that were made to the general plan in again, I think it's 19, not 18, to amend the general plan to be consistent with the floodway changes that FEMA made. And it's also categorically exempt under section 15061B3 of the CEQA guidelines, and that it's an amendment to make the general or the zoning consistent with the general plan. And lastly, there are no physical changes that would result in any development would be subject to further CEQA review as appropriate. So our recommendation is that the Planning Commission adopt a resolution recommending the City Council amend the floodway zoning district boundaries to be consistent with the general plan land use map and the most recent updates to the firm maps. And that concludes my presentation. Available for any questions the commission may have.
Thank you so much for the staff report and for the presentation. Given that there's no applicant other than the city here, I'm going to go ahead and open this for public comment, and then we can have a discussion with the commission.
Thank you, Chair Potter. I see that we have 2 hands raised. I'll go ahead and share my timer. And again, I thank everyone for their patience. I am having some technical difficulties with Zoom, so I'll ask for confirmation that you can see my timer.
I can see the timer, yes.
Thank you very much. And up first is M. Sullivan, followed by Sebastian Birch. M. Sullivan, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Good evening, Planning Commission. So we're a town that sits on a watershed and we're bisected by a tidal river, a tidal slough. Per the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and Scripps, Sonoma County is #1 for flood losses to the tune of $6 billion out of 11 western states and 414 counties. Although other states like Oregon and Washington get more water, we're #1 for flood losses because we build our infrastructure in vulnerable locations and because Sonoma County sits at the peak of landfall for atmospheric rivers. This town has paid out $28 million for uninsured flood losses. So we need reliable flood mapping and protection. And I want to make a request that we undertake the most robust flood mapping possible. In other words, FEMA maps are not going to cut it. They use backward-looking data instead of forward-looking. They don't factor in climate change, nor do they include those homes that have never been mapped for flood risk. They are not designed to account for flooding caused by intense rainfall, and this is a growing problem as the atmosphere warms. Thusly, they are not a reliable predictor of future flooding. Christina Toms, who's a senior scientist with San Francisco Regional Water Quality Control Board, and who presented at the Know Before You Grow River Forum, said if we use FEMA maps, we are going to get it very, very wrong. The Sonoma County Water Authority is planning based on the fact that Sonoma County has the highest losses due to atmospheric rivers than any other county in 11 western states. And the chief hydrologist at the California Department of Water Resources recommends that in place of the 100-year flood, a better approach is to determine the reasonably foreseeable flood, which will take our worst event and we add to that additional safety factors for climate change. The state of California sea level rise guidance document, and I'm a scientist with the state of California, says that new evidence highlighting the potential for extreme sea level rise must inform decision-making. Storm surges, El Nino events, and king tides can produce significantly higher water levels than sea level rise alone. SB 379 requires local governments to incorporate climate adaptation and resiliency strategies in their general plans. Thusly, I request that the city of Petaluma use climate change impact predictive modeling for flood insurance rate maps, like other California cities are doing, such as Santa Cruz and Mountain View. The open source modeling tools are out there, example flood factor, that will help us look toward future flood events, and governments are increasingly being held liable for flooding. And I direct your attention to the California Court of Appeals that upheld a damage award against the state of California to the tune of $464 million. So our general plan is for 20 years. We do not want to rely in 2041 on state maps that were developed in 2021. So we need climate change impact predictive modeling.
Thank you for your comment. And up next is Sebastian Birch, followed by Taryn Obeid. Sebastian, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you for the presentation. I was looking for confirmation on something you said, that the properties removed from the floodway zoning restrictions don't remove the floodway overlay restrictions. The base question being, does this process right now reduce development restrictions on these properties? I ask, the words were just taken out of my mouth, because this flood modeling is based on current and past 100-year flood conditions. The FEMA models don't consider known increases in precipitation intensity that we're expecting from climate change. They don't factor in sea level impacts on mid-river flooding. Some of the local sea level rise modeling predicts upwards of 10 feet of sea level rise situations by the end of the century, and the FEMA maps ignore that. So given that the model that these overlays is based on does not integrate sea level rise, it doesn't integrate climate change impacts from rainfall, the concern would be, is this opening up development in properties that very well may be back in the floodway soon? Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Sebastian. Up next is Taryn Obeid, followed by Kathy Hutchinson. Taryn, I've allowed you to speak.
Hi, thank you. Planning Commission, we really need to reject this in its entirety. The FEMA backward-looking data and old school modeling is insufficient. FEMA is now allowing cities, and many California cities are taking advantage of this. FEMA is now allowing cities to adopt climate change impacts into predictive flood modeling. That's what we need here. Reject this in its entirety and give us stronger protections. I live in the flood zone right next to the Payran wall. I've been here for 3 years and I've immersed myself in this issue. Do you know that we still flood every year? Our backyards and our streets back up because our storm drains are silted in. The Petaluma River up here is not being dredged. So to look at a FEMA map is really not looking at the full picture. And we need to push this back and move towards climate change, not just talk about being climate ready, but to act on climate change. Now, there is an applicant here. M Group gets paid 30% premium for all development that they bring through the city. And I'd like to direct your attention to the third item on that table, Cedar Grove Park. Gee, nearly 200,000 square feet are being removed from the floodway. That's the property of the Barellas. You remember them. They ripped off our city for nearly $10 million with the Basin Street Theater Square project. They are big campaign contributors to city council who are always aligned with passing all of this bad development. I have studied the campaign finance reports. I've studied the M Group's contracts. This is special interest here. We cannot allow these developments that go in that push it back on me living in my house. When it rains every winter, you know what me and my husband talk about when a storm starts? Okay, let's look at our flood insurance coverage again. Oh my God, we think we're going to flood this year? Everybody in this neighborhood still lives in terror because the city has stopped doing runoff analysis. That North Water Street apartment complex, no runoff analysis. Riverbend project, no runoff analysis. FEMA even said that we need to do runoff analysis, else all of our insurance get canceled. But the city has stopped doing it. The M Group has stopped doing it. Gee, why? We got to stop this. We've got to take climate change seriously. Sea level rise, it's coming up through our storm drains and into our backyards. Please push back and give us real science.
Thank you, Taryn, for your comments. Up next is Kathy Hutchinson, followed by Stacy Navarro. Kathy, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I think I did it. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I'm one of the opponents that argued against the Riverbend project last year, and we became pretty educated on flood risk. So one of the things I've learned, like other people have said, that the FEMA maps are wrong because they don't take into account climate change, small stream flooding, intense rainfall, sea level rise. So if we use FEMA flood insurance rate maps, it's not going to be accurate. Also, there's new research that's been done by the world's leading flood modelers that confirms FEMA maps don't paint an accurate picture. An organization called First Street Foundation has taken this research and developed a website called floodfactor.com where you can enter your address and see what your true flood risk is. When I entered my address, it says I'm 5 times higher the risk of flooding than what FEMA indicates. FEMA welcomes First Street Foundation's initiative, saying, quote, it would complement FEMA's efforts. The last point I'd like to make in regards to flooding is that the Army Corps' flood mitigation project wasn't designed to handle the amount of the development that's currently happening, let alone more development that may happen if this gets passed. How do I know this? In the July 2020 Planning Commission meeting where the Riverbend project was being discussed, the developer's representative, Steve LaFranchi, said it. He was talking about how the flood control project was designed and said the Corps looked into infrastructure and zoning of the surrounding neighborhoods and they anticipated further development in their design. Mr. LaFranchi went on to say, quote, one of the things the Corps didn't anticipate was there would be much more development even closer to the river, end quote. So that means the Army Corps Engineers flood mitigation design can't handle the development that's currently happening, let alone future project that this change will allow. The final point I'd like to make is that the idea of updating the zoning now to be consistent with the general plan makes no sense. The document's 20 years old. The city's in the process of redoing it. So to me, it seems like this is some backroom bargaining that the developers are doing to slip the change in before the new general plan is completed. I know we've been talking a lot about drought, but the funny thing is that climate change is not just one thing or another. One good rainstorm and Midtown residents like myself, we're leaving in boats. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Up next is Stacy Navarro, followed by Susan Kirks. Stacy, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you for your time tonight. I don't have a whole lot prepared to say, but I just want to point out, I mean, we've all been here and have all seen flooding with our own eyes. And that's even during recent years when it hasn't been that wet. And I am 100% with Taryn, where I can't count the number of times we've gone out to Friedman's to get the free sandbags to make sure the water is not coming into our garage. So it makes me nervous when I looked at these maps and I saw houses that I've heard the residents talk about water in their houses, and those houses now being taken out of the floodway on these new maps. And that's just firsthand experience. That's not being a scientist or anything like that. That's just talking to people who live here and what they've experienced and what we've all seen. I just want to make sure that we're really making the right steps into the future for Petaluma and taking to heart everything we're learning about the climate and everything that we're seeing happening within our own communities, and make sure that we are protecting our citizens first over the thirst for development. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stacy, for your comment. Up next is Veronica O, followed by David Airy. Veronica, I've allowed you to speak.
Good evening, commissioners and community and city staff. I would just like to echo the comments tonight on FEMA maps being retrospective, and that we really need to get an integrative, cross-disciplinary, forward-thinking approach to everything to do with our watershed, including flooding. We have storm surging, sea level rise, atmospheric rivers, and all of those are worse with climate change. And we need to adapt, and we need to do it right now. We can't wait any longer. So I agree with all the other speakers, and I appreciate everyone's listening and time. Thank you.
Thank you, Veronica, for your comment. And up next is Susan Kirks. Susan, I've allowed you to speak. Susan, you'll need to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Just technically, so you'll know, the unmute information didn't come up for a couple of seconds after you said and were waiting for me. And thank you for remembering that I was here. I don't know if you saw me flashing my hand at the bottom of the screen. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to the Planning Commission this evening. I was a participant, and I think I was the only citizen in Petaluma who attended every single meeting of the last general plan update. And so tonight, listening to your presentation, while I appreciate your level of sincerity in the information, it kind of reminds me of many, many years ago that this is something that would be coming before the Planning Commission of many years ago. And it's concerning. I support the comments that have been made by Maura Sullivan and Taryn Obaid. And I want to compliment them and acknowledge and thank both of them for the time and energy they devote to bringing intelligent, community-oriented comments to meetings like this. I also would like to ask you to reject this presentation. It is inadequate. We are in 2021 with a general plan update that is occurring now. There is an odd situation where it appears, unless I'm mistaken, you're being asked to make these changes consistent with the existing general plan. That seems odd to me, and I would encourage planning commissioners to be proactive and serve your community. Ask that the staff go back, apply the models that have been given to you, the examples that FEMA will support, ask for a return with additional information comparing what the staff finds with the information that was presented tonight. I totally agree. This is 100% inadequate. and will not serve these property owners or the community. And the anxiety that these property owners experience each year with the rain and the unpredictable weather is something I'd like to ask you to really take to heart as planning commissioners. And please reject this request to you tonight and make your request about what you believe should be modeled and should be applied to these properties, and then compare the two when it comes back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Up next is Jerry Wilkinson. Jerry, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Hello. I would just like to echo many of the comments that have been made before me. I'm certainly no expert or scientist, but it seems pretty obvious to me. I mean, we know there's climate change. The water levels will rise. They aren't going to go down. And I'm wondering, of course, and I think it's kind of obvious why this is even being considered, which would be for presumably developments in the area, which is counterproductive to what we need to do. So anyway, I just want to endorse and echo the sentiments expressed before. Thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. And up next is David Airy. David, I've allowed you to speak. You'll need to unmute yourself.
Yes, hi, good evening. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Thank you. Thanks for your time. Good evening, commissioners. Yeah, I very much appreciate what earlier speakers have said and the work that they've done to present information to you all. I think that's wonderful. I can't claim to be as well educated myself, but I have been watching the news for many years. And as I'm sure you've all noticed, so many communities around this country have experienced weather and flooding as never before in the last several years or decade. And I would hate to see Petaluma in the headlines, 5-10 years from now in that same situation, when we have the opportunity right now to do something to avoid that. And, the idea, how many communities have we heard of where, city councils or county governments or state governments have talked about 100-year floods now occurring every 10 years or less. These kind of ideas of how often floods happen and how bad they are is really outdated, as I think people have been pointing out with the FEMA information. It's just not current. It's not where we are even right now, and it certainly isn't where we're going to be 10, 15, 20 years from now. And I just checked the website about, the flooding risk that someone mentioned earlier. And I live here on Payran, right by the river, and it indicates that I now have a 10% chance of flooding in the next 15 years. And that's higher than I thought, considering all the flood work that's been done along the river here. I'm kind of a little surprised. And if I extrapolate that out to what that would mean financially for me and for all the other houses in this area in the next 15 years, it's a lot of money, if it happens. And that a lot of that money would end up coming out, I'm sure, from the city of Petaluma, as it has had to do in the past. Anyway, so I just wanted to, raise that sort of historical perspective, particularly in light of where we are now with climate change and where we're going. I think it really ought to be obvious to everyone that past statistics are no predictor of future performance, as they say in the stock market. So I really think, we should take the opportunity now, especially as we're doing the new general plan, to look at, the flooding possibilities, the weather future, and just have a new idea about what really is at risk in our community going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, David, for your comment. And it would appear that that is our last hand raised from our attendees this evening. With that, I'll stop sharing my screen and pass it back to Chair Potter.
Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for those comments. I'll now close the public comment period. And I did want to give staff the opportunity to provide a little bit of clarification or perhaps reiteration about the difference between the floodway zoning and the floodplain combining district, and to you maybe lay out in a little more detail what the difference is in terms of the development potential of those designations, because maybe I'm off base here, but my understanding was that 100-year floodplain and 500-year floodplain, those are other designations that are in areas beyond the floodway itself. And I think it's important for the commissioners and the public to get some clarity about the distinction in those areas. And I had also another question about when was the last time the floodplain zoning combining zone designations were updated. Were they updated to be consistent with the general plan already, or is that something that still has to be done?
So we're going to tag team this a little bit. We are fortunate enough to have our floodplain administrator, Gina Benedetti Petnick, with us. So we'll try to touch on the various components that have been brought up. So one of the things I would also like to start with, because it was at the top of my head, is the updated modeling that the city is about to undertake, and not only the updated modeling, but also the addition of sea level rise that we are looking at as part of the general plan update. So the city received money from Zone 2A to update our modeling. We also received some money allocated from the city council through our ARPA funding recently to do that modeling and get that modeling underway, which will be 2D modeling, floodplain modeling. And Gina can jump in or add to this. And then also it will be overlaid with sea level rise modeling, and that will be what is incorporated into the general plan when we update the general plan. Gina, anything to add to that?
No, that's a fair explanation. I suppose I could offer a little clarification. So the existing FEMA maps are all based on 1D mapping. The 2D modeling software that we're using now is called TechRaz 2D. It is now, and I'm sure that we have audience members, public members that are aware of this, but it is now approved by FEMA and accepted. And that 2D modeling is significantly more accurate. And we're undertaking that modeling for the entire river as well as our creeks. And Heather was correct in stating that it's fully funded now. And it in addition to the 2D flood modeling, we also have funding now to remap after we're through with that effort. We can remap with FEMA, so we'll get more accurate FEMA maps. Granted, FEMA will never, as far as I know, will never take into account, it will never have that sea level rise overlay. So that's something that we are doing independent of our FEMA mapping process and our new modeling process. And we're incorporating that in our general plan update effort and the assessments that we're doing through the general plan. So that modeling is, we have our consultants working together between the general plan update and our 2D modeling, and we will ultimately be overlaying our sea level rise predictive mapping with our updated 2D flood mapping. And I believe, unless I'm mistaken, that is in essence what some of our attendees have referred to as climate change impact predictive modeling, and it will be coming to us through the new general plan update. And it is a process. It's, you know, it takes months to redo this modeling, and it's something that we've started. We are, I won't swear that the contract has been signed, but the contract is penned with our consultants to start this process. So I'm very excited about it, and I couldn't agree more that it's the only way to accurately assess and look at what our impacts are going to be over time. And so I'm very excited about that. And there was another question. Chair Potter asked a question about the floodway zone versus the combining zone. So the 100-year floodplain, or zone AE, and the 2% or 500-year floodplain. And as I understand it, the map consistency that we're trying to achieve here is only addressing the floodway, and it should not have any impact on the 100-year or the 500-year floodplain surrounding that. We're simply trying to get our maps consistent at this point. And I will say from the bottom of my heart, with all sincerity and truth, that there are no backroom deals here. This is staff trying to correct an inconsistency in our mapping. You know, we're not trying to slip something by before the general plan update. It's going to be a good 1.5 to 2 years before all of this will come through with the general plan update. And we felt that it was important to have our city documents consistent in the meantime, as soon as we were aware of the inconsistency. So I say that with great passion and sincerity, that is the case, nothing more, nothing less here. And, you know, if this commission finds that this doesn't pass your sniff test after hearing this, then, I think Emmanuel and Heather could probably speak a little bit to what consequences, if any, of leaving our documents inconsistent might have in our future. I can't swear to that. And I think our assistant city attorney is also here and might be able to speak to some of that as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. I agree. This effort was trying to, we have two maps showing same thing that are different. And so it was trying to reconcile those two maps to try to bring the one that is the older map up to date with the newer map in the general plan. So that was the intention of this exercise. And it doesn't take away from the concurrent effort we're under right now to update the modeling, to look at the sea level rise, and to have that larger discussion as part of the general plan update.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. And I see Councilmember Fisher has a comment.
I need further clarification as well, so that because I wasn't quite clear in the staff report. My understanding is that the general plan update based on the FEMA mapping of 2016 came before council for approval in 2018. But we haven't ever updated the zoning to be consistent with that general plan update that was approved in 2018 or 19. There's some question about, I think it's 18 because I don't think I saw it since I've been there. And so this is in effect just to make that consistent because we haven't been for 3 years. Is that accurate? Is that what I'm hearing?
That is correct.
Yep.
Okay, so in 2016, when FEMA did the new mapping, when is the next time they're going to do their new mapping? How often?
When we give it to them.
Okay, so it doesn't come from them; it comes from us to them. I don't know any of this stuff, so fill me in.
Yeah, so that's part of this process of remodeling in 2D, and And then once we have updated modeling, we'll be submitting that to FEMA for FEMA map changes, so FEMA will adopt our mapping, our recommended mapping changes based on our updated modeling.
So
we will be the impetus for that.
So what happened in 2016 that we have new FEMA maps? Did they come from FEMA, or did we send something to FEMA to get approval?
Came from us. We sent that in. I wasn't here, but there was work done and that prompted those changes. It was probably the culmination of the flood wall project and the last of the core work around there.
Okay, and how long is the funding, the modeling that we just funded going to take, do you think?
The basic modeling will take maybe a few months, 4 to 5 months, and then there's calibration that will have to happen, and that's a lot of detailed work to calibrate the models. And then the other piece of this that I didn't mention that is actually really important, my bad, is that we are coordinating this with the Sonoma County mapping. So the County of Sonoma is also updating their flood mapping, and they are using HEC-RAS 2D, and they are doing what we call the upper watershed that feeds our river and our tributaries and our watershed. So we'll be coordinating our model with theirs, so that the entire watershed will be modeled consistently, and we won't have any more really goofy conditions at the borders between the county and our waters. And the most important area there is up around, between Pen Grove and along Old Red in the Denman area.
And this flood factor that was mentioned, the open source, have we looked at what our modeling from 2016 shows, or even when, I don't know how long before that was done? FEMA presumably approved it in 2016, which is, again, 5 years ago. We know a lot more than we did then. At least I do, personally. But have we looked at flood factor to see have we sort of done some spot tests to say, okay, this is what our mapping from 2016 said, and this is what they're currently predicting?
It's a little different. I think what you're asking about might be apples to oranges. So the 2016.
I'm sure, because I don't know this fruit basket at all.
Yeah, it's okay. It's confusing. It's complicated, as they say. But the FEMA mapping that was accepted in 2016 is 1D mapping, was utilizing our XP swim model, which at the time was considered, about as accurate a tool as we had. There wasn't 2D modeling at the time that we did that process. And sea level rise, has never had anything to do with FEMA mapping. It is one of my pet peeves. Like, why aren't, they talk about it. They ask communities to take into account climate change, but they don't incorporate it and give us the tools to map on their maps that sea level rise. So we're doing that independently, which we can do, and we'll be using that to inform our general plan decisions moving forward. Does that help? Or did I make it more confusing?
I didn't understand the apples to oranges. So.
Because there's just no comparing sea level rise mapping, predictive sea level rise mapping to FEMA mapping.
Yeah, and I guess that's my concern, is that that what we have before us tonight is something that we know is wrong. We know it doesn't take into account everything that's happening to us here in Sonoma County, from the droughts to the floods. And yet we're going to be doing this modeling now, and the results will be, fairly soon. So why are we coming right now to do these updates when it's already 3 years that we haven't done that update? when we're going to have all this whole new set of data, which we know is going to be different? That's my question.
And I think it was just something that should have been done hand in hand with the general plan update in 2018, 2019. It wasn't. It just keeps falling to the bottom of the priority pile. It came up as let's get this cleaned up. That's why it's here now.
And we're going to have to then clean it up again in 6 months or 12 months, or as soon as we have this.
I think it's going to be a lot longer than that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll
be longer, and it won't be a cleanup. It'll be a redo.
Right.
It's going to look pretty different, I think.
Yeah.
And it definitely will take longer than a few months. What I described to you is the basic map, or the basic modeling and the calibration. After that, there's mapping. There's a process then to overlay and incorporate the climate change impacts from sea level rise and look at that modeling. So it's quite a process. And it will flush out during the general plan update. And I encourage we have some really knowledgeable individuals in the audience that have provided public comment. And I encourage them to, stay involved in that general plan process as we look at the existing conditions reports that'll be coming out soon and going to the public this fall, and white papers on how we're addressing, how we plan to address these issues, and encourage their engagement and involvement and their brain trust to work with us on this.
So just to facilitate the additional discussion that's coming up, it sounds like this item is minor changes to the map for consistency internally with our general plan required by state law, as well as to create a single map that will give certainty to staff and developers to match with the FEMA map as a bridge as we move forward until we have an opportunity for the 2D modeling to inform a new general plan and a remapping, is this correct, of the floodway and the floodplains that will be a more holistic approach. So
I think that was very well said. Thank you.
So I do want to call on Commissioner Ryder. She has some comments or questions on the item.
Yes, thank you, Chair Potter. Just a couple of questions. If I'm hearing it right, the direct implication to residents or property owners relates to the ability to develop. Are there other implications or impacts that we should be aware of for expanding and contracting the floodways?
I think because all of the sites are still within the floodplain, it won't impact like insurance requirements, correct, Gina?
Shouldn't.
It shouldn't.
So no, I mean the fact. I mean, in some areas between the two maps, when you look at the two maps that we're trying to correct, Emmanuel, when he went through those maps, he described and showed you graphically how in some areas the floodway contracted. In others, it moved in and out a little bit. The Pay-Ren area, again, because of the flood control project that we did with the Corps of Engineers, had the largest changes to it. But in those areas, the floodway itself is different from one map to the next. If anything, it improves the condition of some properties, I believe, by taking them out of the floodway, and which has no development potential whatsoever. Right? It's very restrictive. Of course, it's a floodway. It's essentially the river, or the main channel of a creek or a waterway or a river. Taking it out of there, and in the mapping where that floodway is contracted, those areas outside of that then are by default in the AE combining zone. They're in the 100-year floodplain, which is less
less restrictive for development for those properties. It's just those handful of properties in that one panel. And I don't know that there are any of those properties that want to develop. Moreover, I have no idea. It wasn't informing any of our decision-making process. We truly were just trying to do some housekeeping here.
I appreciate that. You said something that you said it improves the condition of the property by taking it out of the floodway. What do you mean by that?
Sorry, it improves the potential to do some development on the property. It's less restrictive.
Okay, so it really is about development potential in that location.
I mean, for the most part, that's what the FEMA maps are, that's what they address. To a large extent, the FEMA maps are feeding the firm maps, which are the insurance rate maps, and it's all about trying to protect properties from risk and from damage by addressing their construction, their height above base elevation, base flood elevation, and by limiting how improvements can be made, or if they can be made in those areas. That's what FEMA and the firm maps are all about.
Great, thank you for that. Just one more question, if I may. You've talked kind of at parts of this, but I'd love to just really hone in on what would the repercussions be if we opted to wait? If we said that we wanted to not pursue this at this time, what are the consequences of that kind of action?
Well, we have an inconsistency between our zoning and our general plan. I've been trying to play this out in my head in terms of when we would look at things, we would be looking at the floodway in the general plan. So what I was trying to think out was, would the general plan map trump the zoning map, essentially? And I'm sorry for using that term, but which one? So I've been thinking about this as we've been talking, Commissioner Ryder, in terms of applying any development potential. You need to be consistent with the general plan. So I'm Dylan, anything to add here?
Yeah, and I'm trying to play it out too, Heather, and I think it depends on what we use the IZO here, the FEMA maps for, but in the land use world, the general plan, that's at the top of the hierarchy, and then you need to have vertical consistency with your IZO specific plans. So the fact that our IZO is not compliant with our general plan probably means that our IZO should not have been adopted, or whatever this chapter is currently not in effect, I would imagine.
I was also trying to look at much of the property, like that map that Emmanuel just had up, that shows, I think it was contracting in that area, correct, Emmanuel? That it was reducing. The properties that actually are coming out of the floodway in this map, mostly they're single family lots that have homes on them. It doesn't really, actually, this is the, Ms. Obaid was referencing the Cedar Grove parcel. Actually, where this is contracting, this is a city-owned parcel. So where something is coming out of the floodway right here, this is the city-owned parcel. It's an open space mitigation that has limitations on what it can be used for. So actually, this property isn't impacted. All of these properties are existing single-family homes with single-family development on it. So it's not, I was trying to look at it through the lens of, is there some property that has a shift so dramatic that it substantially changes the development potential, So this is the river bend, which they stayed out of the floodway in the approved project. So their development was approved outside of the floodway. So by the floodway constricting here, it's not opening development potential in that they have an approved project. So this is where, let's see, this area is where the Gray Lawn Apartments are, I believe. So I was just trying to look at it through that lens, right? Was there a property that was like completely undevelopable and now all of a sudden it's developable? And I'm not sure that there is anything that extreme.
There's also a level of absurdity when you consider that there are single family homes on solid ground that according to the prior floodway mapping, would be part of the main channel of the river. I mean, it's a very sort of a stark discrepancy here, and you know, those properties are. I don't have my FEMA mapping open right now to look, but I assume they're in the 100-year and 500-year floodplain along both banks of the river, but have been actually a lot of those properties were taken out of the 100-year floodplain with that 2016 mapping. I should try and pull that up. I do remember that now, but there's definitely some in the 500, and so you know. I can't imagine that we would make any development decisions based on that old mapping, Heather. It would be absurd. I suppose worst case scenarios, Dylan, is with if decisions were made on inconsistent mapping, I suppose we open ourselves up to legal jeopardy. Is that safe to say that, you know, there could be a claim or a lawsuit filed because the city didn't perform due diligence and knowingly was using, you know, inconsistent mapping between our governing documents? Is that a possibility?
That's possible. I know Santa Rosa, some developer in the Fountain Grove area, they're trying to sue the city of Santa Rosa, saying that, oh, you knowingly developed in a place that you knew was a fire zone, that there was a fire 30 years ago. I think it's probably a high standard. It's something that I'd want to look up. I don't have the answer for that right now, Gina.
Yeah.
And theoretically, a property owner or a developer, you know, to play it the other way, a property owner or a developer who the zoning showed the floodway, the general plan did not. They wanted to do a development. I suppose they could ask for a rezone of their parcel, the floodway designation of their parcel to be consistent with the general plan. Just typically we try to map, you know, consistency among our maps. So
this is that same area showing the general plan map. So the zoning map would be consistent with the floodway shown here on the general plan. And then these areas that are in this blue crosshatch are in the floodplain.
Okay, thanks for that. And I see that Commissioner Hooper has his hand up.
Thank you. Many of my questions have in the last little bit been answered. So really I have a comment. I just wanted to ask if it was still appropriate for me to give a comment at this time, Chair Potter.
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate the difference between the floodway and floodplain, and I can understand wanting to correct discrepancies. However, even just looking at decisions we've made in my time here, and admittedly that hasn't been very long, there have been projects we've approved fully knowing that if the general plan were updated tomorrow, there'd be no way we would put that development there. And it's hard for me to look at the reductions in the floodway, again, understanding what it actually is, and be all right with potentially making a decision to align our current IZO to a general plan that by the time we get through all of the mapping and all of the modeling might be fundamentally rewritten, and we might have essentially opened ourselves up to development decisions we might really regret. So before I'm going to support something like this, I'm going to need to see an inventory for potential development that might come out of this. And I'll need something a lot more concrete about legal repercussions, because our IZO does not necessarily meet muster when it comes to adhering to our current general plan. And so that doesn't really give me cause for concern, given just how many things we still have to update. I appreciate the work that has gone into this, but I really can't see us taking a decision this quickly on something if we know that there's a good chance we'll be completely redoing it down the road just for consistency. But thank you.
Commissioner Bauer.
Thank you, Chair Potter. I just have two questions and then maybe a comment after. But I was wondering, so this inconsistency between the maps has been going on for how long? How long have we been grappling with this?
About 2 to 3 years.
Okay. So not too new. And then my other question was about the predictive modeling that we're going to be doing. I hear that it's going to involve sea level rise, but are there other things that it will include also, like storm surges and effects from atmospheric rivers and things like that? I just want to make sure that if we're going to be doing this and relying on this, that it's the best package we can actually get, that it's all encompassing. It will include all of those things. Because, you know, sea level rise is one thing, but there's other things too that could contribute to floodplain and floodway rezoning.
So when we do the overlays, Vice Chair Bauer, we are able to look at storm. We look at flood tides. We look at storm frequency in the way that we choose the predictive models. So it isn't like there's a map or a model for atmospheric river impacts that I'm aware of, although there could be something that's under development and that I don't know about. But so it is part of the climate change imperative that we look at all these factors. And we're doing the best we can with the tools that are out there, and we're trying to find the best darn tools we can to do this work. So that's as big a promise as I can give you at this point without knowing more. And again, I encourage our community brain trust to participate in the conversation so that we are doing this right and that we are looking at all the things that we need to be looking at and, looking over our shoulder. I welcome it.
Yeah, understood. And thank you. And then just following up on that, the 2D modeling that we're going to be doing, that could also change not only the floodplain, but the floodway too, right?
Yeah. I think the greatest changes we're going to see in that modeling, however, will be in the floodplain. There will be, I think, areas that are in the floodplain now along some of the creeks that might actually come out. It'll shift. Some of it will move up creek, higher in the watershed. Some of it will move down. I think the greatest changes we're going to see with 2D modeling will be with the floodplain.
Right. Okay. But there is a reasonable likelihood that the floodway we're seeing today is going to be updated in the 2D model, that there's going to be differences.
I'm sure that there will be some differences. Absolutely. But I don't know that they're going to be that significant in the floodway.
Okay. Thank you for that, Gina. So with that said, I think I'm on the same page as Commissioner Hooper that I feel uncomfortable a little bit with it right now, just because we've dealt with it for the past 2 or 3 years. And I feel like we're right on the verge of having changes that really could have a big impact on the future zoning and development. And I feel like we're so close that maybe we should just wait for them to happen. And I certainly don't, as a planning commissioner, think it should solely rest on our shoulders. I think the city council should weigh in and decide if they want climate change to be taken into effect with decisions that we're making at this day and age right now. You know, I don't feel comfortable making this decision based on data from 2016. I don't even think the data was from 2016. I think the report was from 2016. So who knows when the data was collected. So I don't really feel comfortable making with this approval based on such outdated information. And I also feel like, for me, it's a little bit scary for property owners in this area for us to be doing this kind of like back and forth, like now you're in, now you're out, now you're in, now you're out. So, you know, to me, I'd rather just leave it or have the city council weigh in on it and let us know what they think about that. So that's my 2 cents anyway. Thank you. Back to you, Chair Potter.
Thank you, Commissioner Bauer. And I think this is a really interesting and complex conversation that we're having, because we have a situation where we had a different hydrologic regime before the flood walls were put in. And the firm map adjustment was to account for that. And the purpose of the floodway mapping is to designate the active stream channel. And when you look at the map and the aerial photos and you see a bunch of single family homes and neighborhoods and other uses, you know that's not the active stream channel, right? And so it feels like what we're trying to do with this correction is make a consistency so we know what's on the ground and we know what is possible for the development. And I have to echo what I've heard from the other commissioners, that the issue that I find for the land use approvals is in the floodplain. It's the floodplain where we have the 100-year, the 500-year, the issues of sea level rise, and where we've been approving new development because that's what the general plan and the zoning says is allowed. And that is the big question we need to correct moving forward in our general plan discussions. And I appreciate Commissioner Bauer, the ideal that we're going to do this fast, but general plans take a long time to go through the public process, to develop, to be approved by the commission, and then embraced by a council. And I've never seen one completed in less than 4 years. And I think that's what we're looking at here. So I am reluctant to miss this opportunity to correct an obvious error in our mapping and to make that adjustment and move forward and recognize that the 2D mapping and all of the climate science is going to inform us on the next round. But I don't see any benefit of keeping the inconsistency for the time being. So we've had an opportunity to hear from staff, also from the public, and now the commissioners. And I don't know if we want to take a straw vote or if somebody's prepared to entertain the motion that is recommended by staff. Commissioner Bauer, your hand is still up. Are you volunteering? Oh,
I'm not volunteering, but I can. We might as well just get it done with, I guess. Oh no, I'm not going to make that motion then. No.
Okay. Well, we need to agree on some stuff. Oh, Councilmember Fisher.
Well, I was going to offer up. It feels to me like there's a 4 and a 3, and that a motion to approve the staff report probably wouldn't move forward. And so I'm wondering. I know that Commissioner Hooper had some request about additional information. I'm wondering if we just might want to continue this to a future meeting so that that information can come forward and we can get a little bit more clarity on the result of this decision. Because I personally am a little uncomfortable with the safety measures, and are we putting anybody at risk by doing this, knowing that those maps, and we've heard this over the years, that the maps are not accurate. So that would be my recommendation.
So I just want to restate, Commissioner Hooper had asked for more information from legal and staff about the consequences of not correcting the inconsistency between the general plan and the zoning ordinance. Is that the information that would make it possible to make a more informed decision, perhaps at our next meeting?
Oh, I also just wanted to throw in there, the other thing I'd asked for was some kind of inventory of what potential amount of land might come up for development if this decision were made.
It wasn't that, Emmanuel, the table you showed had each of, that was in the packet, correct?
Yes, so one of the attachments had a table that listed each parcel and the amount of area that's either removed or added to the floodway.
Respectfully, because I did take a lot of time to cross-reference and go through that, there's a difference between saying this parcel is now opened up and then actually looking at land that might be primed or in some process or potentially available for development. So I would like a little more information that staff might believe would be more likely to develop, especially because it's a pretty generic table set.
Well, I agree with that. I think to present it in a format where if it's already built out in accordance with the zoning, this isn't going to make any change for those parcels. So if you could pull out and highlight the parcels that have any development potential at all, that would be helpful. It sounds like perhaps, Ms. Hines, that we would need more than a couple weeks to get that information, but I would like to try, if we continue it, to do it to a date certain, so that we have already completed our public hearing on this and we'll have Commissioner Alonso back. So is it possible to look at a date right now that would satisfy everyone?
Yes. We could look at October 12th, although Emmanuel, you will not. What? No.
It's my birthday.
Oh. Actually, we don't want to look at that because I am trying to bring the telecom ordinance on that date, actually.
26th.
So I guess it would be the 26th would be the next available. Because I don't think that, we have 221 parcels here. So to really give, parcel by parcel, a look at what's on the ground, what's the change, what's the development potential. I don't think we can turn that around by the 28th.
So could we consider a motion to continue this item to October 26th?
I'll make that motion.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Do we need a roll call vote?
Mm-hmm.
That's a yes, I think.
Potter,
Aye.
Bauer,
Aye.
Hooper,
Aye.
Alonso, absent, Ryder,
Yes.
Wissman,
No.
and Fisher.
Yes.
Okay, so that carries.
Okay, so we'll have
continue to the
another look at this in a couple more weeks. And that completes the agenda for tonight's meeting. Our next regularly scheduled meeting will be September 28th, 2021. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Recording stopped.